Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire.
Oh, you're trying to bring me down and run me out of town. You're taking what you want, but you can't take my rhythm now. I'm walking to my own beat, just gonna be me. I'm not replicating nobody.
Hey, this is Doug. I've got a special guest with me tonight. You know, my guests are special, I guess, because they're guests. And so, but Mackenzie Balmer, her husband was on here quite a few episodes ago. His name is Zane Balmer, and they are at the church that I was at for 29 years, Trinity Evangelical Free Church in student ministry. Mackenzie is also with Apex Missions Ministry with Evangelical Free Church of America. And so tell me this, give us a rundown of what you do in Apex.
Yeah, so I get to serve Apex as the Youth Missions Administrator. And so what we do is we mobilize the next generation of gospel influencers. And we do that by helping them be immersed in strategic sites all around the world. So Apex is a ministry of the Evangelical Free Church. So we partner with the local church and Reach Global missionaries. Reach Global are the EFCA missionaries. We partner with both the EFCA local churches and then the EFCA Reach Global missionaries to send and receive students all around the world for the sake of the gospel. And so, you know, sometimes that's college age individuals who say, I want to explore missions. And we get to send them to Rio de Janeiro. Which is actually where Zane spent 6 weeks, which is super cool. Before we were married, when he was between his senior year of high school and his freshman year of college. For example, we just took our students, Zane and I took our students to Miami in the summer 2023, this last year. And Miami is one of our Apex youth mission sites. So I get to help youth pastors take their youth groups all around the world for missions. And then I also get to help some college age students pursue missions all around the world. So I got to travel with our youth group, which was really sweet for me because students kind of got to see what my job is while I'm there as their youth leader. And then I will probably do some more traveling as I continue in my role with Apex. I'm in kind of a unique position right now because I'm part-time going to full-time. So once I'm full-time, that will open up a lot more opportunities. We do all of our team does do their support raising. And so that's where I'm at in that season. So I'm still able to, thankfully, serve the team part-time. And so, we do travel for team meetings and orientation and stuff like that. But as in regards to like sites and stuff, I'll get to experience more of that probably, hopefully very soon.
Tell us how people can support you and how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah. So we have an Apex Missions Instagram. So I would say to see Apex kind of in action, that's a really good starting place. And that's really strategic too, because, with Gen Z, social media is so influential. And we want to have image bearers for Christ in any way possible, right? And so social media is one way that we've been able to do that. And so to see Apex in action, I would say to check out our Instagram page, which is just at Apex Missions. To look at our website, you can either use the URL or you can type it in with the EFCA.org address, like web address. And on that note of EFCA.org, there's actually a portion for giving. And so you can see our whole Apex team there. You can read about us. We have missionary profiles. There's also Reach Global missionaries. So it's not just limited to Apex. There's ministries throughout the EFCA, longstanding relationships all around the world for missions. And so people can give that way to have more knowledge, right, about what the EFCA is doing for missions as a whole organization, as a whole ministry. If people go to give.efca.org, there is actually a Give Now option on the top right. And then there's a blue big button kind of in the middle of the page, and it's labeled Our Missionaries. And so it'll have all EFCA missionaries on there. And then they can filter by division. and they'll click Apex. And then if they scroll through, they'll get to see our Sweet College Age students as well as the rest of our Apex team. And then they'll find my name as well there to be able to support me.
And what does APEX stand for?
That's a great question. So it's not an acronym, but we have created an evangelism tool out of our name, if that makes any sense.
Yes,
So
it does.
it's all about, turning those Chronos moments into Kairos moments. And so that's actually something that we share with our youth pastors and youth groups when they register with us is, how do you teach your students to pause and to see how the Lord is working in moments? So although Apex didn't start out with an acronym, we've made it into one.
Good. I wanted Mackenzie to come on especially to tell about what she's doing in ministry and how she got there and different things like that. So I gave her a list of things I wanted her to talk about, and she's going to just say what she wants because that's the way we do it here. I wanted you to hear from her because she and Zane's life go back during their adolescence. They knew each other, or at least knew of each other. At what point did you ask Jesus Christ to your heart? Give me your story. Give me that backstory. How'd you grow up, that sort of thing, leading up to your encounter with Jesus Christ. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah. So growing up, so my parents actually divorced right before I went into fifth grade. And I remember praying in that season, and truthfully, my first prayers were out of anger with God and not understanding, which is really significant for multiple reasons. The first being that my older brother and I, we didn't grow up in what you would consider like a traditional or typical Christian home. We didn't go to church. We didn't really do Bible readings. We did have a Bible. Each of us had a Bible. And we had a knowledge of Jesus, but religion as a whole wasn't really discussed much in our home. We knew the purpose of like Resurrection Sunday as Easter. We knew the purpose of Christmas, but our parents were really diligent about wanting us to make faith our own decision later on as we got older in life. And so the fact that I had been praying at that point after my parents divorced was really significant that I had an awareness, I guess you could say, and it was never really exposed to me or you could even say in some terminology like forced upon. It was nothing like that. And so then as I got older, it was very clear to me by the age of, I would probably say between 10 to 12 years old, not much older than fourth grade going into fifth grade, but
Right.
I just distinctly remember conviction being laid upon my heart. And it's funny looking back because I can clearly see that's the Lord. And actually one of my prayers as an adult has been, Lord, why are you mindful of me? And so looking back on it and having that conviction established in my heart from a very young age, about things of biblical matters too, not just, like I'm not going to steal, but like even in terms of purity for marriage and just very distinct biblical truths, I can see it as the Lord's hand on my life. And so I would say it was significant for that reason, but then also significant that my first prayers were out of anger because sometimes I read through like the story of Jonah, for example, and I think sometimes we're so hard on Jonah and thinking about, how could he ever be angry with God and, how could he be angry at people receiving mercy? And then sometimes I think that that's the position we find ourselves in and we're just naive to it, or maybe we don't want to see it. And so, yeah, I just think it so many times we start off in faith that way and we don't even have awareness to that. And so then as I got older, I actually remember one of my friends from high school. She invited me to youth group at the end of my sophomore year of high school. And it was a really hard season in my life for several different reasons. Being a teenager is not easy. And sometimes I think that's where, the church can do a disservice to our youth because sometimes adults unintentionally, I think, treat teenagers like their problems aren't real problems. And so I think that's a huge mistake that the Big C church is making today. But anyway, so, I had a lot going on in my life, my sophomore year of high school. And then towards the end is when she invited me to youth group, and I attended for the first time. And at this point, my brother, who's 4.5 years older than I am, we have the same mom but different dads. And so he was actually living with his biological dad in a different town nearby. And he was already going to church, and like he had already given his life to the Lord. And so when I started going to church, it was an entirely different way of knowing Christ. And so it was through youth group, actually, between my sophomore and junior year of high school, at a summer camp where I had realized God was graciously revealing to me my need for salvation. So it was right between my sophomore and junior year of high school. And my cheer coach in high school and her daughter was actually the youth pastor's wife. They were hugely influential in my walk to Christ, because, kind of, I had mentioned, like, at the beginning of my high school years, like, it was just a really, really tough season. And so then having them as influential people in faith and me not even realizing it, and yet there was a draw there. I'm so grateful for them. And then their continued discipleship after that. Sometimes I think also the Big C church tends to think of discipleship as, okay, we're going to get them to salvation. We're going to get them to know the Lord. And then there's no follow through after that. And so, they just did a really cool job at welcoming me into their life. Nothing like flashy, extravagant, like not social media the way that it is today, but just like real discipleship and real care and love.
That's amazing. And you're basically speaking to youth workers the way I want you to speak to them. Tell us more about what you're saying and where your life has gone from there.
Yeah, I'd love to. So after I received Christ at summer camp, I immediately could start to piece things together. I guess you could say, like, specifically, why the Lord had placed conviction on my heart from such a young age, even before accepting salvation. And I think, too, it's worth noting that a lot of times, especially with youth and youth ministry and young adults, like, there's so much going on before their brain allows for them to realize, because that's something I tell myself all the time, even in youth ministry. Every Wednesday, I tell myself, I'm like, Kinsey, their brain is not fully developed. Their brain is not fully developed.
That's right. That's right.
And so, looking back on that season, I remember starting to piece things together, and even things that I truly do believe God was giving me thoughts that were not my thoughts. They were holy thoughts in that moment of accepting Christ and instruction of what to do and what not to do. Now, the obedience part, I wasn't super great about implementing right away.
So you were human.
Oh my goodness, yes. Completely and without a shadow of doubt human. And so I just remember, I actually had a 1.5 year long relationship in high school that should never have happened, because I remember at summer camp, the Lord telling me, like, do not go to homecoming. And so, homecoming dance and things like that. And in my brain, I'm like, okay, Lord, I just accepted Christ. Like, whatever you ask of me, I'll do. And then later on, someone asked me to homecoming, and it was like, poof, like in one ear out the other, like didn't even remember it. And so that led to a 1.5 year long internal battle for me to really, I guess you could say, prioritize my faith. And so, and the convictions all held true, right? Like, so everything prior to that, that the Lord laid in my heart, like that was still real. And like, that was still, I was walking in obedience in those things, but like more of the day to day, right? Of not being distracted, I guess you could say. And so a 1.5 year long relationship, and then that came to an end. Now, simultaneously, in that 1.5 year long relationship, I had no idea, but Zane had actually started attending the high school. And so that's kind of where our story starts. And so then right in my senior year, right at the end of my senior year, I kind of waited, honestly, to make a decision on where I was going to college. And I ended up going to a school about 3 hours away in central Illinois. And the university is Illinois State University. And I just remember I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to put a perfect bow on my university experience. I'm going to go here and I'm going to go for broadcast journalism. And this is what I'm going to do. And this is what I'm going to do. And hindsight 2020, right? I look back and I'm like, oh my goodness, like I didn't even pray, Lord, is that where you want me to go? So it's just, you look back and you learn. But I went to Illinois State University my freshman year, and it did not take long at all for me to realize that being Christian on a public university was an isolating experience. But I also remember having confirmation while I was at Illinois State University that this is where the Lord had me. And specifically just things with my roommates, because I actually had 3 roommates in one dorm room. It was a little bit of a tight squeeze in there, but we made it work. And I just remember time and time again praying, Lord, why do you have me here? And then time and time again, him answering that prayer. And it really opened my eyes to seeing the university as my mission field. Like I was not there for academics. I remember, and it's funny too, because in high school, looking back, whenever, our church had a missionary or missions was talked about, I never thought about that being something that the Lord would call me to. It was always like, oh my gosh, that's so great for you. I'm going to chill over here.
Good for you. Good for you, right?
Yeah, so real. And so then when I got to Illinois State, I'm like, oh wait, this is my mission field. And my eyes started to open. And so, I was like, everyone I talk to, I want them to know Christ, which I think is the heart and the goal of every Christian, right? But implementing it and finding practical ways to do that is where sometimes the the rubber doesn't meet the road. And so when I was at Illinois State, I was in the cafeteria one day and I was just eating cereal for lunch because that's what you do as a freshman in college. And I remember a fraternity guy just sitting down at my table and his first words out of his mouth were, do you believe in speaking in tongues? And I was like, who are you? And just like such a biblical question, but like, who are you? And then I remember distinctly another girl from one of my classes. She grew up Catholic. She had lost her mom actually in a very traumatic way. And she was really struggling with grief and unforgiveness within herself. And she gave me a bracelet of Philippians 4 when it talks about, I can do all things through him who strengthens me. And I just remember feeling my heart, like the heartstrings tugged on, because I was like, here she just lost her mom and yet she thinks I'm strong. Like, how is that even possible, Lord? And through that conversation with her, I was able to help explain, why the Bible calls homosexuality a sin. And then I had a guy from student government and he said, hey, I know you're a Christian. I would really love to hear, about your faith. Can we meet in the cafeteria sometime, maybe over lunch or something? I just want to ask you some questions. And not in a romantic way at all. He was just genuinely asking about my faith. I was like, yes, like this is the opportunity I was waiting for. And so we get to the cafeteria, we sit down, we start eating. And then he proceeds to say, so to start, I just want you to know that I'm an atheist and, my mom passed away from cancer when I was in high school and my dad and I's relationship has never been the same. And I'm sitting at this table and I'm like, I am so unqualified. Like, Lord, like, why are you, giving me this opportunity? Like, I don't know how to answer this. And then, my roommate's saying, they want to be closer to God and helping them in medical crisis situations. And then, it was like, and again, and again, and again, I was just seeing God provide opportunities for me in the midst of me being better. So kind of going back to Jonah here for a minute, I know that this is very different, but in my brain, going to Illinois State initially was like golden. And then as I was there and I started to see the world for what it was and, just corruption and destruction and all things evil and wicked and foolishness galore, I remember starting to kind of have that heart of Jonah of like, why am I here? Like, I don't want to be here. Like, I was getting really frustrated. And even still, time and time again, the Lord would kindly invite me in to these conversations with people who were so desperate for the gospel, honestly, more desperate than a lot of people in big C churches, right? Like,
right.
because they don't have the hope that we have as Christians. They don't have a defense for the hope that we have. And, I was praying actually at the end of my freshman year, fall semester. And I just remember praying, Lord, I feel like I'm being called out of this university and you're going to lead me somewhere else. Where do you want me to go? And I distinctly remember telling the Lord, I will go anywhere except for Regent University, and I will do anything except go into ministry. And I appreciate you laughing because you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Sure, absolutely.
And so it was one of those moments where you're just humbled. I didn't want to go into ministry specifically because I knew some of, I guess you could say, like the political side of ministry, right? Like when churches are unhealthy. Not every church is unhealthy, but some of them do get to be that way. And I didn't want to be associated with that. And I didn't want to go to Regent specifically because my brother and sister-in-law had just gotten married and they went to Regent to finish their undergrad. And I didn't want to be like that annoying little sister, that like followed them around and tried to start their marriage. I think that my heart was in the right place, but through commands in Matthew 6, right, of praying and fasting and tithing in secret, of course. I say it now as a reference point, but it was in secret at that time. And the Lord just opened up so many doors for me. I mean, scholarships I didn't apply for, favor and class availability and housing. You name it, like the Lord's hand was on it. And so I was like, okay, God, I know this is where I know this is where you're leading me, which is also funny because at one point I considered Trinity International University, which is actually where Zane was. And so even God not leading me to Trinity, I think was his protection because Zane and I have talked about it. At that point, I don't know that we would have been ready to start our relationship in that season. And so God's timing really is so perfect. And so I transferred out to Regent, and I actually, my major changed as well to communication studies with an emphasis in public relations and advertising, as well as biblical studies. And it was so fruitful. I mean, the way that God just orchestrated it, even for me to be discipled by my brother and sister-in-law, to see what a godly marriage looks like, to watch them have hard conversations. And, not every hard conversation they had in front of me, right? Like they had private moments too, where they probably talked things out. But just getting to see that up front was really transformational. And so then when I was at Regent, I was there for 2 years on campus. I actually worked for the university while I was there. If you know, like CBN or Pat Robertson, that's where he was based in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And no complaints either, being 20 minutes from the beach. So that was a little gift from the Lord as well. And so I got to be out there for 2 years. And while I was there, I would say my faith really started to take roots because, I was learning theology. I was learning what is predestination versus free will, just like all of the things that you just can't normally get to in a Sunday morning sermon.
Exactly, yes.
It was so helpful for me. And so then when I was at Regent, my junior year of college, there was actually a situation where I needed to go back home to Freeport and to finish up online. And so that took me back to Freeport. And in the process, actually, I pursued some Christian counseling with an older woman. She's not old, but she's just older than me, if that makes sense. And so it was really helpful to have some counsel just with things that I was going through in that season of life. Yeah, she helped me to really understand what mental health looks like as a Christian. And I think that that's a topic that's still working its way through the church, Big C Church. And I would love to see more development and more progress in that area, actually. It's a delicate balance, right? Because we don't want to treat people like what they're going through isn't real
Right.
or hard or honestly a health problem. There's a chemical imbalance and there's a whole science behind it. And on the other hand, we also don't want to enable people to cling more closely to their diagnosis than the Word of God. And so I think we have to do better as a Big C church to figure out what that looks like with education and prayer. And not saying, you need to be more educated or you just need to pray more, but like to combine them both and to make progress forward. I went back home and I was doing some counseling, and it was really fruitful and healing through the Lord, of course. I know his hand was all over that and just appointed that for me. And I'm really grateful for that. And so then while I was home, I knew that I needed to be involved in the local church. And so for a couple different reasons, I just didn't think I could go back, or that it would be fruitful for me to go back to the church that I was at in high school. And so I was actually at a different church through that summer. And I ended up stepping away from the church that I was at. It was about an hour drive from my hometown to this other church that I was serving at through the summer. I knew, I couldn't quite explain it, but I knew that God was calling me to find a different church. And so in about October of 2018, I started attending Park Hills Evangelical Free Church in Freeport. And little did I know that is where Zane's dad was a pastor. And, at the time, like, he wasn't even on my radar because I was in counseling and I was trying to focus on how to be healthy in every way, right? Not just spiritually, but in every way.
Right.
And so when I was at Park Hills, I quickly realized that it was Zane's dad's church. I kind of wrestled with the Lord for a couple weeks because I was praying and I was like, Lord, is this where you have me? Is this where you want me to really get invested in community? I mean, I was taking my commentaries to church every Sunday morning. Like I was, starting from scratch and really wanting to, I guess you could say, weigh everything. Because, one of the things I tell our students all the time is, I know that what Zane is preaching is biblically accurate and he's rightly dividing God's word. I 100% do. And even still, you should be in your Bible weighing everything he's saying. And so when I was attending Park Hills, that's what I was doing, right? Like I was weighing everything that was being said. Little did I know it was by my father-in-law. And so I remember his mom actually coming up to me, and it was like she could sniff out a new person, I swear. And his mom, Charmaine, came up to me and she's like, "Hey, is this your first time?" And I was like, "It is, actually." And so that Sunday morning, my mom was with me, so I got to introduce her. And then, for that couple weeks after is when I was really weighing, Lord, is this where you have me? I remember probably middle to end of October, I was walking in a church at Park Hills one morning and one Sunday morning, and I was just praying, and I'm like, Lord, I don't know that I really find community here yet. Like I found community here yet. Like, is this where you have me? And just really questioning, in that inner wrestling of like, is this the right step? Which I think is what so many young adults are going through too, is what is the will of God, right? Like I think so many young adults will be obedient and they do want to know what God's will is. But to practically know, the next step. I knew at this point, okay, they're a Bible teaching church. I know that, the community of believers here is solid. And so, but I just still, it was like, I guess I was trying to figure out how do I be connected because I wasn't serving yet. And then that Sunday morning, I was sitting in service, and at the time, I didn't know it. I didn't know it when I was sitting there, but it was actually Zane who was sitting in front of me. And all I could think, I'm laughing because it's one of those things where when you're going through it, you know exactly what you're talking about, but otherwise it might sound kind of crazy or weird. But I remember sitting there and I just remember thinking like, I have no idea what my father-in-law preached on that Sunday morning because all I could see was the back of Zane's head. And I was like, man, if the back of him is this attractive, I can't imagine what the front looks like. And so I was like, so not aware of what was being taught. But what I do remember at the end of that service, and again, I hadn't even seen that it was Zane yet, no idea, nothing. But I remember at the end of that service, gathering my stuff, and then somebody is walking over to me from the other side of the sanctuary. And this guy was about 2 years older than me in high school. So for context, this guy Shane and his wife Jenna and their daughter Aaliyah, they were also in the church sanctuary, but Shane was the one that had walked over to me, and Shane was 2 years older than me in high school. And then Zane was 2 years younger than me in high school. When Shane had walked over, I was not anticipating to see him. Like, I'd never really even talked to him in high school. And, my prayer at the beginning of that Sunday morning was like, Lord, is this where you have me? I just want to feel welcomed. I want to feel community. I want to feel all of the things like that your church is meant to be. And so help me to know that this is where you have me. And also just for clarity, like no fault at all to Park Hills. Like, I'm an introvert by nature. And so I was kind of flying under the radar. And so there was just an internal situation that I was kind of processing and battling through. Like, is this where the Lord has me? Shane walks over and he said, "Hey, you're Mackenzie, right?" And I said, "Yeah." I was like, "You're Shane. You were a couple years older than me in high school, right?" And he's like, "Yeah, yeah." He's like, "Well, I just remember you." His exact words were, "I just remember you being a rock star for your faith in the high school, and I'm so glad to see that you're still walking in your faith and you're walking with God." And he said, "I just want to take a moment to welcome you to Park Hills. I don't know if you've been able to find community here, but I just want to take a moment to welcome you and encourage you. Is there anything you need?" And just like completely answering my prayer, right? And then I realized, oh my goodness, that's Zane way over there now. And so it was just so funny how there were so many answers to prayer in that moment that I didn't even know about. And yet the Lord was so quick to answer those prayers, right? About my attendance with Park Hills. And then to see Zane, from across the room. Long story short, he had asked me out in high school at one point, and we'll circle back to this at some point, but I did not take him up on his offer. And so in that moment, when I saw him, I was like, oh man, I was like, do you remember? I totally said no. And like panicking now on the inside. Because also, right, when someone is attractive, you get socially awkward.
Yes, yeah.
Like, oh my goodness, I can't even think about talking to him. I can't even think about apologizing. And so, but all of that to say, so then I left Park Hills that Sunday morning, and then I just never stopped going. I just continued to go back because I knew ultimately, like, not even related to Zane, because he was actually at college during the time. While I was finishing my undergrad online, he was still at Trinity because of, he's 2 years younger. And so not related to him, but I just knew, okay, this is where the Lord has me because the Lord affirmed me and answered that prayer. And so when I continued to attend Park Hills, I remember about February timeframe, I was feeling convicted because I had been attending for a couple months and I hadn't been serving. I, knew that God, from when I was in high school, I knew that God had put youth ministry on my heart, and that it was something I believed that He was calling me to do and to be part of. But I also knew that I was going to be graduating in a couple months in May of that year, which is 2019 at this point. And also just for context too, like Zane and I were not talking at all during this point, like during this season of life, actually, because I did what any girl would do. And I went and looked at his social media and I saw that he was in a relationship. And so I actually did not communicate with him at all because one, I knew where I was at mentally, right? Like I knew that there was an attraction there. And so I wanted to be honorable to the Lord. I wanted to be honorable to Zane, and I wanted to be honorable to his girlfriend in that season and not give them any reason to question or to doubt, who I was or anything like that. So my decision to stay at Park Hills and to start serving there was not at all reflective of Zane. When I was considering youth ministry and joining the youth group as a leader, when I knew that there's a potential for me to be joining the youth ministry as a leader at Park Hills, I kind of hesitated in a way because I knew I was going to be graduating in a couple months in May of 2019. And I didn't want to just kind of fall off the face of the earth for the youth students, because I didn't know where I was going to be employed. And so from December through that summer, actually in 2019, December of 2018 through that summer, I had been applying for jobs all over. And I mean, like literally all over the world. Like I was applying in Illinois. I was applying across the United States. I was applying internationally, Canada, right? So it's not like completely international, but still
no, it's still
in another
international. Those
Yeah.
Canadians, right?
And so, I was applying all over, and I could not get a job lined up, and not in an arrogant way by any means, but I knew that I was employable, and like the jobs that I was applying to, I knew that I qualified for them. And so I'm like, Lord, like, why am I not getting a job? And you see that student debt approaching, and it's like, oh my goodness, I got to find something.
Right.
So all of that to say, I didn't want to join the ministry at Park Hills when I knew there's a potential that I would be leaving in just 2 months or 3 months. But still, I filled out a youth leader application and I took it in to Pastor Chris Dugenberg's office. And I remember my initial interview with Park Hills to join as a youth leader was with the admin at the time. Her name was Erica. And we were meeting in Chris's office. Chris actually wasn't even in there. And I sat down at the circular table, and Erica was across from me. And there's actually an open seat to my right, which, a circular table, it's like semi-right.
Right.
And so there's an open seat there, and it was between me and Erica. And she's just asking me some questions. And what was really funny is Pastor Chris walks in, and he sits down. And my first interaction with him, by the way, and his back was to me because he was facing his heater because he gets really bad allergies. And I remember that because he asked for a disclaimer. He's like, by the way, I'm sorry, I'm not being hurt. I just have really bad allergies. And so, he's listening in now on this conversation between me and Erica. And at one point he stops and, he's turning to his left. So his profile, I can see the profile of his face, but again, he's facing away from me, so I couldn't see his entire face. But he paused and he said, "What'd you say your name was again?" And I was like, "Mackenzie." He's like, right, but like your last name? And my maiden name is McElfresh, and so I said, Mackenzie McElfresh. And he goes, okay, now it makes sense. And I was like, what?
What?
Right? Like, I'm like, okay, what does he know that I don't know?
That's
So
right.
I'm just taking the next couple minutes and like putting it in back pocket information, right? And so then I'm watching, the interaction between Erica and Chris, because Erica, was Chris's admin. And so they obviously had sidebar conversations before. And Erica starts laughing, and she said, "Zane had a huge crush on you in high school." Erica looked at Chris, and I saw Chris's face, and it's like the face where someone is like, maybe you shouldn't have said that. So, Erica and Chris are laughing, and Erica's like, "What? It was in high school, like, it's fine." And Chris's face still was kind of unchanging. He's like, "Oh, maybe you shouldn't have said that." And so in my brain, I'm like, okay, like, that was peculiar. So I don't say anything, but I just kind of take note of it. And also, like, they, to my knowledge, did not know up until that point that Zane had asked me out in high school. And so then I started to piece together. I'm like, oh, wait, do people at this church know? Like, they had to have known now. And so all of that to say, I also remember Chris in the best way challenging me from the beginning. And he said, to my concern about not wanting to join youth ministry and then potentially leave shortly after that, I just remember him saying to me, Mackenzie, whether you're here for 2 months, whether you're here for 2 years, whether you're here for 20 years, like, whenever the Lord calls you away from Park Hills or away from Freeport, like, we're going to send you, and we're going to send you joyfully. And so for me, that was a relief, because from that point on, I knew, okay, even if I can't be here as long as I want, or even if I'm not here for maybe as long as they need, like, they're supporting me as an individual and as a Christian and a young adult than more than anything else. And so to me, that was, really eye-opening, because that was also very telling of who Chris was and his leadership, and very telling of Erica and, their desire to not only equip and build youth students, but to build the youth leaders. And so I, without hesitation, then joined Park Hills as a youth leader. So then at the time, when I had first gone back to Freeport, I wanted to find work. And so I started working at the local YMCA. And so when I was there, I really got to know Mariah, who is one of my best friends, incredible gift of a woman from the Lord. And at the same time, now we're best friends, but I didn't get a chance to meet Maddie because actually Maddie was going to Canada So Maddie and Zane grew up together. They're both half Canadian, actually. And so Maddie was going to school at the school I applied to work full time as of May 2019. So in July of 2018, when I started working at the YMCA, Maddie was actually stepping out. So we didn't get to talk. We didn't get to cross paths because she was going to Trinity Western University in Canada, which is a Christian school. It's kind of like a sister school to Trinity International University in Deerfield, Chicago. I, in a way, took Maddie's position at the YMCA because someone had to fill the role that Maddie had. And so I was friends with Mariah, but then I didn't get to be friends with Maddie until later in January because Maddie actually came back. And so she and Mariah and I got to really hang out and just become the best of friends and have like true and sincere fellowship in a really godly way. And so super thankful for them and how the Lord just completely ordained that timing. And in January, actually, when Maddie and I started working together, she knew apparently behind the scenes Zane's side of him liking me from high school because, they grew up together and like their moms were both from Canada. So very close families between the two. And so Maddie knew things I didn't even know. And so all of that to say, like, Maddie and I got to become really good friends just through awkward bonding sometimes between work and then between, stories and stuff. When I was serving at Park Hills, Maddie and I got to also serve together because she was a youth leader there. And I remember telling Maddie, I see so much of myself in Mallory. And Mallory is actually Zane's younger sister. And I remember telling Maddie, I feel like the Lord is drawing me to disciple Mallory, but I feel like I have to do it so delicately because, Zane was in a relationship and I was trying to be really careful because I didn't want, again, for any reason there to be a question of integrity.
Right.
And so Maddie said to me, I would encourage you just to disciple her, because sometimes when it's our own brain, we overcomplicate things. So I started discipling Mallory, and it's really cool because she and I got to build a relationship and a really deep sisterhood in Christ, completely apart from Zane. In March timeframe is when I started to disciple Mallory, and then I, served with Park Hills in youth ministry for a while, and then, May rolls around, and I'm like looking at the clock, like, what am I going to do for employment? And at this point, actually, technically it was in April, but April to May timeframe, Mariah had transitioned out of her role at the YMCA. And so I stepped in to help in the marketing department. And one thing about our area too is that we make up about, I think it's like 10 to 15 communities in Northwest Illinois, different towns, suburbs, subdivisions, all of those things. And so I had never thought even about working in a nonprofit, specifically as a Christian in marketing, and which is kind of funny considering what my degree was.
Right, for sure.
But I just never thought about it like in the sense of, like your local YMCA. And so I didn't have a piece that it was where I was going to be long term, but one of the things that I've really tried to implement in my life is, what's the next honorable step in front of me? Like, instead of trying to figure out like A to Z plan, like what is the Lord calling me to that I can see and sometimes even not see, right? Like, what's that step of faith? What is being put in front of me, kind of thing. I stepped into that role for the YMCA, and it continued to serve at Park Hills. Long story short, July rolls around. I was really struggling, to be honest, because I couldn't get Zane out of my brain, and I felt like I was being sinful, and I was just praying, and I'm like, Lord, I'm praying, like, please, like, remove him from my brain. Like, I don't want to think about him. I don't, like, it was really honestly angering at that point. And it wasn't obsessive by any means, but it was like, he would come into my brain and, I'm like, why am I even thinking about him? Like, I don't want to think about it, and it was something where, I was very honest, very transparent with my friends. Like, I told Maddie, Mariah about it. I'm like, guys, I don't know what to do. And so end of July rolls around, and I distinctly remember Mariah. Love her. She just spoke so much truth, and she said, "Well, Kenzie, if you're praying and the Lord isn't taking him out of your brain, like if he's not taking these thoughts or whatever out of your brain, like maybe change your prayer to ask God what He wants you to do with it." And I just remember like that rocked my world because, I on one hand I was like, this isn't making any sense, and on the other hand, at the same time, I hadn't even thought to ask the Lord like why, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a little bit different too, right? Because there wasn't a covenant established yet, right? Like it's not like Zane was married or anything like that. Like there was an element to it where, it was innocent. Like it wasn't like I was intentionally trying to like steal him or anything like that. Nothing like that. And so I just remember Mariah saying that, and I just had this overwhelming sense of peace. And that was a Thursday. And then I remember texting Maddie and Mariah over that weekend, and I was like, guys, I prayed. I don't think the Zane issue is an issue for me anymore. And I was like, I think I'm totally past this. Well, then Monday night rolls around. And Monday night rolls around that following week. And I had a dream that Zane and his girlfriend at the time had broken up, and that then he approached me in a romantic way. And I woke up on Tuesday morning and I was like, okay, Jesus, we got to talk about this. I was like, Lord, I'm confused. Like I thought we were finally on the same page here. And Maddie and I had been planning something for a Park Hills young adults event. And so I texted her about the young adults event. And she sent me, some details and then a list of names of people who were coming that following week, which was when the young adults event was. And she mentioned Zane's name on that list. And truthfully, I was kind of surprised because that summer Zane had an internship at a different church in Iowa. So like he was not even in the state, like not anywhere around. And I remember telling Maddie, I was like, man, I had the weirdest dream last night. And I explained it to her over text message. And she was like, Kenzie, I can't explain it, but you need to come to the YMCA like as soon as possible. So Maddie and I actually got there early for our shift. We called Mariah on speakerphone in the conference room, and Maddie proceeds to tell me, she's like, Kenzie, last night you had this dream, and last night Zane and his girlfriend broke up.
Oh.
I was like, what? And so honestly, like just the way that the Lord orchestrated it, there are so many details interwoven where it's so evident that it was God and not anything that we would have chosen or like pursued or anything. I mean, we were actually on two different completely tracks. And so it was just wild how, looking back, God completely, rerouted. It was like you're at a T intersection and somebody goes right and somebody goes left. And then all of a sudden you're going down your paths and the Lord makes you go back to a T intersection so you can cross paths again. And so it was actually 5 years later that Zane and I actually like sat down and had a conversation together. Like we had not talked or anything since high school. And so what was also super significant to me, I mean, our town in Freeport is like 26,000 people. So like it's not small, but it's not big. But throughout that week, I mean, we were in the same places, around the same people, like, and nobody was orchestrating that, truthfully. Like I remember then, my birthday was that following week. So we had that young adults event. And then he asked me on that Tuesday night, my birthday was that next day on Wednesday, but that Tuesday night at the young adults event, he asked me afterwards if we could meet up sometime before he has to go back to Chicago for school, which is a very short window of time. And he said, I'd love to hear your testimony. I'd love to hear how God's been working in your life the last 5 years. And my first words were, what are your intentions? Because, I had been in a serious relationship. I was actually previously engaged. That's what led me back to Freeport to pursue counseling, to get in a church community. Like, so I knew, right? Like I knew the investment side, and I was like, I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste your time. And more importantly, like, I don't want to be confused anymore. So he asked me, I mean, you can imagine his face was a little startled. And so,
I bet it was.
yeah. And so we, had a conversation that night actually, from, McDonald's is the only thing open in a town our size. So we went to McDonald's and it was after the young adults event. We went to McDonald's from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. And we just sat and we talked. And I mean, we laid out everything on the table, all of our questions, like tell me about your past, what's good, what's bad, what's ugly, what's like glorifying to the Lord, like just all of the things. Because I was pretty confident in how God had been orchestrating everything. Like, okay, this is significant. And at the same time, I also, like I had kind of noted, like I didn't want to waste his time. I didn't want to waste my time or anything. I knew leaving that conversation that he was my husband. And it's also funny because if you ask Zane, I don't know, I don't remember if he shared this or not on his talk with you on the podcast, but he had actually said that in high school, he would tell people like, I'm going to marry her someday, referring to me. And so, which that was also before he knew I was in a relationship in high school. So, he didn't mean any harm by it when he said it. To see that come to fruition 5 years later, and it's just really cool. And he actually was going back to Chicago for school, and then to start as a youth pastor part-time at a church in North Shore, Chicago. And he knew I'd been looking for a job, and so he's like, why don't you apply? Like, what's the worst that could happen? Like they're looking for an office manager right now. And in my brain, I'm like, I mean, the worst that could happen is I get another no, right? So
Right.
like I was tens and tens of applications deep at this point and trying to find a job. So I was like, I have nothing to lose. I applied, and they actually asked me in for an interview. And what's also really cool about that is before Zane and I met and we had that conversation, I had a stirring in my heart, in my mind, that I needed to put in my 2-week resignation at the YMCA. And I didn't have anything lined up, right? And so it was just a step of faith, but I felt like the Lord was asking me to do it. And too many times in my life, I'd said no to the Lord, and I was like, this will not be one of them. And so I had put in my resignation, and my last day was going to be on a Friday. And again, that was all before Zane, right? So then when Zane told me that I should apply for this position at the church, and we also like notified the staff and everything, and the leadership and the elders and pastors at this church, like, just so you know, there is a romantic interest between us, just, for transparency purposes.
Right.
And so my last day at the YMCA was on Friday. And then that Monday I had an interview at the church. And so there was no gap essentially in my employment, which is crazy. And it was before, my student loan debt was going to start kicking in. So I started working at the church, and Zane lived with one of his best friends, Crandall, in the pastoral housing of the church. The church had housing provided for them. And then a woman named Helen, who honestly is a godsend. Like, she's just one of the most incredible people I've ever met in my life. Very, like, she just radiates the word of God. I mean, everything she does is about evangelism. And it's equally encouraging as it is convicting to be around, because she always challenges you, to do better, and for the sake of the gospel, not like for pride or anything, So she graciously and very kindly and blindly took me in. Like, we had not met, and she was willing to let me live with her. And so, all of that to say, Zane and I spent a year and a half in the North Shore, Chicago. And while we were there, we dated for 2 months. So it was in August of 2019 when we had that conversation, and then we had officially started dating at the end of August. And also, just as a note too, like, one of the things I just think remember, when we were talking at McDonald's that Tuesday night from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m., and then that next day, Wednesday, which is my birthday, we had another conversation. And at the end of that conversation, I told him, I was like, listen, I know that people are going to be suspicious about the timeline, and I don't want people for any reason to question your integrity. So take as much time as you need to process the ending of your relationship. Take as much time as you need where you feel like you'd be comfortable potentially pursuing, a relationship with me. But I was like, whether it's 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years, like, I'll be here. I'm not in a rush, because I had that confidence, right, that this was the man I was going to marry. And so, but more than my desire to be in a relationship with him, I wanted him to be confident, and for him to feel like, okay, my integrity won't be in question to pursue this with her. Naturally, there were still questions. And so, which I understand, like looking from the outside in, like it does look really suspicious. But knowing the context and even all the little details, I'm not even able to share just for time purposes right now. Like it was so evident that it was the Lord. Then when Zane and I started dating and we were both doing ministry in Chicago, we dated for 2 months and got engaged. So little did I know that a month in, he had actually purchased a ring. And then we got married by month 10 of our relationship.
Oh,
and
wow.
so, yeah, it's really fast. Which, is kind of like, I don't necessarily like encourage our youth students to do that, but there are circumstances where, when you have full confidence and full assurance, and the people in the church that are older than you, that have more life experience and wisdom, that have been married longer than you, and they're affirming you as individuals and as a couple, I mean, that plays a tremendous role too, right? Like when you have that accountability for your relationship, and people are across the board affirming, like, this is a good move. Like this is a wise move to get married and to join in that covenant. So I think, Doug, like one of the things that I would encourage the Big C church with, sometimes I think that there's a tendency to not talk about dating, or there's a tendency to go one of two ways. Either we don't talk about dating at all, or we do talk about it, but it's in the regard of don't date, especially with youth ministry. And I think it's really a disservice, right? Because, I mean, God wired people to want to have relationships together. And so I think how we approach the conversation, not you and I necessarily, but just like we as a collective church body, we have to change kind of our approach. Like we have to view it more as, how do we set up teenagers to date well, with the intention of marriage? How do we help them establish boundaries well? And also, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is not just teaching virginity, but teaching purity, right? Like virginity is the way that we honor the Lord for holiness, but the end goal is actually not virginity, it's purity, right? Like we want to be pure and blameless before God. And so you have a generation, not necessarily just Gen Z, but just generation by generation. Like you have young women who have not waited, have not saved themselves for marriage. And as a result, then they feel shame, they feel condemnation, they have lies from the enemy, self-condemnation, like all of the things. And then they internalize it. And instead, the conversation has to shift to how can you be holy as he is holy, even when you have made that mistake, that sin of not waiting until marriage for sex and for all things purity in that way. And so, just even for, I don't know if you have any youth leaders who are females who listen to this, or like, young adults who are females who, are Christians, and they're like, man, I messed up. Like I would just encourage them, like, that doesn't mean that you can't be pure anymore though. And the conversation has to change about that. So yeah, that's, I guess, my 2 cents on that too.
Well, I think it's more than 2 cents. And here's what I'll encourage you to do. And I'm so glad you went this route and talked about this, because here you are, a child who went through a divorce that is earth shattering, earth shaking. And even before middle school, then you went through your middle school years having to still deal with this. Whether it happened, it would have been even worse probably if it happened during your middle school years, but you're a pre-adolescent. And then you are in this adolescence, and here you are, full circle, not even full circle, 180 from there, really, from where you were to where you are with Jesus now. And you encountered God in such a different way. You went through mistakes, absolutely. So tell us what else you want to tell us, Mackenzie. Is there any final words you want to say to youth workers out there? What do you want to say that, what's something you wish people would ask you, but they don't know? Well, they don't even know that much about, they don't know about you. This one thing that you do in life that is just fun, but no one asks you about it. What is that thing?
I love that you asked that question because when I saw it come through, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know. like, and honestly, I don't know if I have an answer. I don't know if I have an answer to that only because so much right now of Zane and I's life feels like we're kind of at max capacity.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I think sometimes my brain is, like when the internet's connecting and it's just like that buffering. So I think I'm going to simmer on that one if that's okay. But, you asked worst, best, and most challenging in ministry. And so I would say the worst is I distinctly remember when Zane and I started here at Trinity. And, because of my background, even before I've been serving with Apex, kind of as I mentioned, like in high school and then even in Chicago, like even in Virginia Beach too for a season, the Lord had put it, I would say, in my life to pursue and to serve in youth ministry. I jokingly tell people all the time, yeah, when I received salvation in Christ when I was in high school, I just never left youth group. so, but I would say though that with that, right, there's a lot of strengths that I've gained from my experience. But then, when we moved here, I really had a moment where I felt like the Holy Spirit was leading me to take a step back and to just really think about what my role looks like, right? Because, my role as the helper is so much more than doing dishes and sweeping floors. Like my role to help Zane as his wife is so much more. It's so much deeper. It's so much richer. So, like, is doing the dishes important? Absolutely. Is sweeping floors important? Absolutely. But my role as the helper, like, there's an accountability for him. It's a soundboard for him. And in that, sometimes I can also give too many opinions. So,
Yeah, I get it.
one of the things I would say,
I have a wife.
yeah, and lots of years in youth ministry.
She's a better discipler than I was, by the way.
Oh, that's so sweet.
Oh, yeah. She was head over heels better. Just amazing. Go ahead, though.
So, one of the things that I had reflected on, I would probably say from 2021, even now, right? Because none of us are perfect. Like once the Lord reveals something to you and God is pruning you, like you can't unknow that. You can't pretend like it's not an ongoing process. And so one of the things I've learned and I'm still learning is knowing when to give my opinion and when not to. So maybe this isn't for all youth leaders, but maybe specifically to the youth leader's wife, the youth pastor's wife. Like, God appointed Zane to be the youth pastor of our youth group here at Trinity. God did not appoint me, and God doesn't, need me to be another youth pastor. What I'm called to do is to support my husband, and sometimes that's not always giving my opinion or not always pointing things out to him. I actually remember Mariah at one point, one of my best friends I mentioned earlier, when she was getting married, because she got married before Zane and I. One of the things she said to me when she was getting married that she received as advice was never be so loud in your husband's ear that he can't hear God. And I just remember, flash forward a couple years later, 2021, 2022, and that came to my mind. And I was like, oh my goodness. Even though the things I was saying had merit and value, and even though Zane was super kind and, he didn't belittle, he didn't tell me to stop talking, like nothing like that. But it was just more of the Holy Spirit and God's mercy to me to reveal to me like, hey, you're actually not being super helpful. Like, this isn't what I'm calling you to do. I'm not calling you to lead the youth ministry. I'm calling you to help Zane in the youth ministry. I would say to your question of, what's one of the best memories or best experiences, is hands down seeing disciples make disciples. And also with that, students seeing what I'm doing with Apex Missions as valuable and also as a viable option for their life for missions. One of the things I was talking about recently with Zane and even on our Apex team is when Jesus called his disciples, he was also calling missionaries. He said, I will make you fishers of men. And so even we just had a Q&A panel with our youth group students last week or 2 weeks ago. sometime in the last couple weeks. And one of the questions that was asked of us as leaders on the panel was, what's something that's encouraging, or what do you want to challenge students with? And my answer to that was, Jesus didn't commission the disciples because they didn't have doubts. It was actually the opposite. Right before Jesus gives the Great Commission, it says, and some doubted, right? And so Jesus didn't commission the disciples because they didn't have doubts. He commissioned them because of his authority. And so to see the next generation make disciples, to see the next generation discipling their peers even, and in some ways discipling their parents, like the spiritual aspect is so different, because there's opportunities to lead your parents in ways that, isn't necessarily like the typical, parents raising children. Like there's an opportunity to share the gospel with your parents where, as a student, sometimes we see that they have more knowledge of scripture than their parents. There's an opportunity there. And so for the next generation to see that to the ends of the earth still matters is super encouraging to me, especially my role with Apex. Like every day I have the opportunity to pray with youth pastors or pray with students who are considering missions, whether it's like at the forefront of their mind or, it's just being sprinkled in. The Lord doesn't waste anything. And so I'm really excited to see where Gen Z goes in this gospel call to the ends of the earth.
Well, listen, I'm going to let you go. Any final words you want to say?
Just thank you so much for asking me to do this. That means a lot that I was invited to be part of your podcast.
Oh, listen, I've heard so much good stuff from you, and Zane himself said so many good things, and people have talked about you. But Mackenzie, no, it's an honor for us and for me to have you on Youth Worker on Fire. So Mackenzie, say goodbye to everyone, but hey, we love having you on the show.
Thank you so much. Bye, friends.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.